welcome to this edition of my Clarendon Chronicles podcast. My guest today is Lee Drinkwater. Lee is Warrant Officer One, Regimental Sergeant Major in the UK Royal Marines, with a distinguished career marked by global service in high-pressure situations. Drawing on his extensive military experience, he now advises corporate organisations through his own performance company, Solace International, which offers a unique perspective on leadership, teamwork, responsibility, and culture. Lee's insights are shaped by over 20 years of leading elite forces, making him a sought-after contributor in the corporate world in cultivating strong and resilient teams in the business world. Lee, thank you so much for joining us today. What I know is an incredibly busy schedule. It's taken a while for us to get this time together. To add some context to our discussion for the audience, Lee and I actually got to know each other when we shared our academic journeys together at Newcastle University. Lee achieving an MSc Master's degree in strategic leadership, whilst I was studying for the same level of award, but in coaching and mentoring. Lee, welcome to my podcast.
Afternoon, Jeremy, and good afternoon to the audience. Firstly, thank you for that extremely kind intro, an opportunity to speak with you. Like you say, it's been too long. I've watched all your previous episodes, which feature some fantastic, inspiring guests and amazing insights.
Thank you very much, Lee.
And amazing insights.
Looking forward to this, Lee.
Hopefully, I can add some value, and I'm looking forward to it.
I'm absolutely looking forward to it, and I know you will, Lee. And as I mentioned into the introduction, you are just about, and I'm sure you're going to tell us about this, but you're just about to complete your time in the Royal Marines as a commando. What I do know is, in relative terms, and you and I talked very briefly about this in Newcastle, you actually became a Royal Marine quite late in your career. What can you tell us about your personal journey into this elite organization, Lee?
So first and foremost, it feels like I've had three lives combined into one already, but yeah, you're right. So I grew up in a small working class mining community in the north of England, and as some of the audience may be aware, without the mines in these communities, there's very limited opportunities. So sport was my outlet. So as a schoolboy, apprentice, and then into a professional footballer at my local club, which was Barnsley Football Club, in my early formative years, if you like. And that was the sort of first insight into leadership, I suppose, reflecting back. Unfortunately, when I was around 19, going on 20, I was released with minimal academic qualifications. I think I had 3 GCSEs at that point. So started looking for gainful employment, had various jobs, mainly manual labour type roles. But then in the late 90s, 1997, I began working in the UK security industry in event and personal security space. I did that for sort of 5 years. It had its ups and downs, like most jobs. But ultimately, I was not fulfilled. And I was striving for a challenge and something that my family and myself could be proud of. And my best friend at the time, he's still my best friend now, he was in the Royal Marine Commandos. I knew very little about the organisation at that point. But what I saw him go through and what he achieved inspired me to join, which I did. The problem was, when I joined, I was 29, almost 30, and the upper age limit at the time to join the forces then was 27. It's now been extended to 32, but at the time it was 27. So I had to go via my Member of Parliament, got support from the Royal Marines in the form of their potential Royal Marine assessment course trainers that sort of sent a letter in also, and ultimately got permission and a waiver to commence Royal Marine training. So I did commence training when I was nearly 30, which was an eye-opener, a shock to the system. So my peer group were ranging from 16-year-old school leavers to early 20s to late 20s, postgraduate university educated people in the same rooms, in the same dorms, if you like, and me, the old man in comparison, which was an absolute culture shock. However, I found something that I loved and I was quite good at. So I went through training in the same troop which is rare. There's a lot of injuries and a lot of people failing at certain points. And I was fortunate enough to receive 2 awards on completion of training: the Sharnock Trophy, which is for the all-round best marksman, and the King's Badge, which is the overall best recruit in training, which I was obviously, humble to receive. But most importantly, I gained the coveted Green Beret and became part of this exclusive club. And then I quickly left the training centre to my first Royal Marine unit, which was 4-2 Commando in Plymouth, and almost instantly went out on global operations. And that was 22 years ago. And that's how it began.
I love the way that you describe it in such a matter-of-fact way, Lee. Having got to know you over 2 years, and you and me being in the same, well, I can't remember what we called it, but the same same cohort of 4 when we did the various academic modules together, when we were having the sort of weekly, twice weekly critical friend analysis, I guess, of each other's work. Doesn't surprise me that you haven't told me that before, that you won those 2 awards, but I'm sure the audience will get the gist as we go through this as well. That again, why would that be a big surprise, having got to know you and your background as well? My family is from a mining background as well. I don't think you knew that, in slightly further north and west. But yeah, my father was in the mining industry, and I think also going through that challenge, being released at 19 as well in the football club, and because I follow football and know a few people kind of in that industry, I think I've read a stat that something like 95% of people who are in the pro world at 16 have gone from the pro world at the age of 21. So 95% of people looking for that kind of next challenge, I suppose.
I think the recent stat that I saw on that was less than 2% will go from apprentice. I think the apprentices have mainly dropped out now, but schoolboy forms through to professional, I think it's less than 2%.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. But you didn't find yourself, you achieved your Green Beret. For those of us who've never had any experience of the military world and a military organization, and you describe that period to come out of the other end after all of that training, lots of dropouts, lots of injuries. What are the qualities? You talked about having to get support to enter the Marines. What are the qualities and characteristics for us mere mortals that define a commando in the Royal Marines?
Wow, well, we have our Royal Marine Commando card that every Royal Marine gets issued and carries around with them in their wallet. And I know on one of your previous podcasts, you and Murchison talked about the different values, mindset, and I know we may cover it in more detail slightly later, but I would say the Royal Marines are defined by their ability to sort of overcome adversity, adapt to any environment, and maintain an unwavering focus on the mission. The mindset encompasses that, and the commando mindset: be the first to understand, the first to adapt and respond, and the first to overcome. It's this mindset that everybody is bought into, everybody is communicated throughout the whole organization, and it's this mindset for me that makes the force one of the most formidable fighting forces in the world, and they've been that way for over 360 years. So this is not a new enterprise, it's not a new mindset. This has been the same mindsets that the Royal Marines 360 years ago, up until the UK Commando Force, it is now known as. I would say, if I could categorize the actual characteristics, I would say, 1, the elite training. In that training, Royal Marines undergo one of the toughest and longest basic military training in the world, 32 weeks. And that prepares them to operate in the most extreme of environments: Arctic, jungle, desert, mountain, and anything in between. There's obviously a physical conditioning element included in that. And that also includes the infamous commando test. But the mental fortitude as part of that elite training is key. So I think that mental fortitude is one area. Adaptability and mental resilience. We talk about it a lot at work, and I talk a lot in my new enterprise. An unshakable mental toughness in any environment, and it's trained and it's ingrained. And sort of our motto, "Primera Pateram," by sea, by land, that reflects the adaptability and determination to complete any mission, no matter what the obstacles, and in a range of scenarios, from amphibious assaults to humanitarian aid, and again, everything in between. But that's all brought together with teamwork and belonging. So we work as a real close-knit team built on trust, communication, and mutual support. And those fundamental elements, characteristics, if you like, are paramount in everything we do, and it creates a bond that's forged through shared challenges, adversity, and the ethos of not letting anyone down, left on right of you. So you're sort of really driven to make sure that you're not the person, if things do go wrong, to be the reason. You want to be.
This is exactly the reason I was really keen to have you as my guest, Lee, because why do people in your position go into the corporate world? You mentioned some things there, and I probably wouldn't put the amphibious elements in there and the humanitarian aid, but virtually everything else that you said there, you could apply to a corporate team, a corporate organization. And of course, we're not dealing with the kind of pressures and scenarios that you're dealing with. I'll pick up on one thing that you said there, because you did mention one of my earlier guests, and I'm interested in this because we talked really briefly about it in Newcastle, and by some bizarre experience, and again for the benefit of the audience, when I was chatting to you on, like, I think it was day one I think of our Thai academic journey in Newcastle, and you said, "Oh, I'm a Royal Marine," and I said, "That's interesting, because on one of my previous qualifications, I met another Royal Marine," and thinking that there's absolutely no chance that you would know each other, I said, "Oh, I know this chap called Ewan Murchison," reference there, and who's been my guest on, I think, episode 2 of my podcast. And I think, I'll ask you to define the question. He was your first commanding officer, company commander in the Royal Marines?
So at the time, he wasn't my first company commander, but it was my first operational company commander. So I went into a different unit and had a company commander in UK based in barracks. Yeah. But Ewan Murchison, at the time, Major Murchison, yes, he's gone a long way since there. Yeah. But when he was Major Murchison, was my first company commander in Juliet Company 4-2 Commando on Op Herrick 5, which was my first or second operational tour.
So I remember you saying he almost like picked you out. So I'll put you on the spot, Lee. Why did he pick you out?
This depends who you ask on this. So I, from my point of view, I was the company's communicator at the time. Yeah. So responsible for communication systems across all the various troops in the company, and also to the commander's communication, strategic communication up and out. So I was responsible for all the systems and all the communication discipline involved. As we began the beat-up training towards the operational tour that was the Op Herrick in Afghanistan, Ewan was setting what we call his task organisation. So the breakdown of how he wanted his company to be or battered or set out and to fight. So he was going through that procedure, and I was fortunate enough that there was a space in one of the sections, because we at the time had an orbat of 8-person sections within a troop, and there was a section commander, so in charge of an 8-person team, space available, and he asked me if I could get a communicator replacement to run the communication for the company, and would I consider being the section commander for the tour, which I absolutely jumped at, because for the audience, a section commander, so a junior leader. At the time I was a corporal, so a junior commander in charge of or looking after 8 people on operations is the ultimate job what any Royal Marine joins for. So I absolutely jumped at the chance, and I quickly got a replacement. I'm not sure if my replacement, I'm a good friend of his to this day, was too pleased with the swap, if you like, but he replaced me, did a quick substitution, and I quickly embedded into the company, and we used throughout the tour as both a section commander in 2 Troop, where we were utilising the small armoured vehicles known as Vikings, tracked armoured vehicles. But for the majority of the 6-month tour, I was what we call a WIMIC commander, which for the audience is a stripped down Land Rover with no sides on it, with weapon systems mounted on it, used as force protection and overwatch for the company. And that's where I met Ewan and forged a great friendship.
Fantastic stories. Well, you mentioned some of the training. I know you can't go into a lot of the training, but can you give us a flavour of things that we just can't really imagine in terms of the training? So you mentioned it's 32 weeks. What's the dropout rate? What's the injury rate? What do you get sent all over the world? I mean, again, for the benefit of the audience, I find this fascinating. I know we haven't got that much time, but what's it like? Can you simplify it just for us?
So yeah, I'll try and simplify it. So what is it like? It's an intensive and transformative journey. I would say, and that's a personal opinion as well as gaining the sort of the examples from across the force. But like any training, it's progressive. It's in a very structured personal and professional development strategy within it. You don't see that at the time when you were having the training delivered to you, but it's absolutely very progressive, and a lot of academia and a lot of science is put into the training. So the first block is what we call a recruit orientation phase. It's 4 weeks, and that is, in a simple form, is converting a civilian to basic military skills, acclimatization into the standards and expectations of a Royal Marine. But before you actually jump into week 1, which is quite a new concept. It used to jump in from the civilian train station into Commando Training Centre and start your training, which increased the dropout rate because it was the acclimatization into what was and what is a bizarre sequence of events. You then go into phase 1 training. Phase 1 training is basic military skills, physical training, weapon handling, fieldcraft and navigation. And that's for the next 10 weeks. And again, everything is progressive, and it culminates with an exercise, a confirmatory field exercise, and a fitness assessment. And then you go into what we call phase 2, which then is, once you've done your individual training, it's then team and section skills for the next 12 weeks. Within that next phase, you have reconnaissance, surveillance, small team tactics, medical training, and different types of warfare, urban, littoral, etc., etc. And this phase also, you get heavier weapon systems, the general purpose machine gun, and you have rigorous fitness assessments across that, to then enter phase 4, which is probably the best known area of Royal Marine Commando training, the commando phase, where you then start the infamous commando tests, which are all done over 1 week or 5 days. The endurance course is a 2-mile obstacle course through bogs, rivers, tunnels, challenging terrain, followed by a 4-mile run back to camp with boots and kit, and then concluding with a marksman test, which you have to get 7 out of 10 on the marksman test at the end. 9-mile speed march is next, completed in 90 minutes, carrying 30 pounds of equipment and a rifle, done in a squad element. Tarzan assault course, may have seen this, or the audience may have seen this quite regular over YouTube or on the TV. A high aerial obstacle course, finished in 13 minutes with the same load. And then finally, probably the most famous of the Commando tests is the 30-mile march over Dartmoor, grueling trek, completed in under 8 hours, carrying 40 pounds of equipment and a rifle. And at that point,
wow,
completing all the tests, you earn the covert Green Beret, obviously symbolising the entry into the force. That is a sort of quick canter through what it looks like. If I come back to the end and just say, just to emphasise, because I get this a lot, that all phases of training, the recruits at the time, train ranks when they finish, are involved in developmental and progressive leadership training throughout. The reason it's not broken down into actual lessons is because it's a golden thread that travels all the way through their training pipeline, and that's really progressive. Quite a new thing, a novel approach, but really, really beneficial, where it becomes the norm, where the individuals are decision making, talking about and understanding resilience, understanding high performance, etc., all the way through training, which is great.
Lee, I find it fascinating. I'm sure the audience do as well. And they're probably, I'm guessing lots of people have never heard that kind of description before. And I haven't either, to be fair. Having done all of that, and you find yourself then next in international situations, pressurized situations. And for those of us who've only ever worked in corporate world, pressures around month end or challenging management decisions, and your stressful and pressurized situations are life and death, completely different. How do you prepare for that? How do you got your training? How do you prepare for the first time somebody says we're going on an international operation? As you say, you're section commander with 8 people going to Afghanistan. How do you prepare for that?
So if we talk about pressure, pressure and stress, and I think, again, on one of your previous podcasts, I think it was articulated brilliantly by Ewan, but pressure being the external factors impacting ability to concentrate, which affects behaviours and actions and ultimately performance, and stress being internal, perception of your ability or your capacity to deal with pressure, and something you can control. An emotional regulation or learning to manage emotions is crucial within that. So we talk a lot about that in the force, and that translates to civilian organisations and the business sector also.
I'm just gonna stop you there, because that again, I'm just thinking, just to have it explained in such black and white terms, stress being internal, pressure being external, and you can control the first one. I mean, that's quite an eye opener, I guess, for some of the audience.
But it was an eye opener for me, if I'm being honest. When I joined the Royal Marines training, and training's developed so much in the last 20 years from a positive aspect, that, and I'm now fortunate enough to be delivering leadership training and this explanation to people coming into the force now. It absolutely, what I would say, if you can deliver an explanation in layman's terms, no matter who the audience is, and potentially drop an analogy in there or something that resonates with the individual or the team, and that's really powerful. It's really powerful, and it goes a long way. And then the other element that helps us deal with pressure, if you like, is the systematic exposure to high pressure scenarios, but in a psychologically safe environment. to develop resilience, to develop effective stress management strategies. And again, some of the audience may be listening or viewing and thinking of a military establishment not having that kind of leadership approach. I would argue a sort of an historical leadership approach of a hierarchical chain, but we have moved forward in the UK Commando Force in particular to a much more modern approach, a much more deliberate approach to relieve, or at least give the information, tools to the individuals that can then implement them within their teams to manage stress and pressure. And I think how I like to view it is, I'm based in the Southwest at the moment, Jeremy. I think I mentioned it just before we came on. And how I like to explain this to the guys and girls is a good old analogy. I'm in the Southwest, famous for water sports. So dealing with pressure for me is like surfing on big waves. Yeah. So at first the waves, they seem overwhelming. You might fall off a lot, but by practicing in smaller, safer conditions, so those safer conditions are a controlled, psychologically safe training environment, you build the skill to stay balanced. You learn to focus on the wave you're riding instead of worrying what's coming next. So that's staying present and focusing on what you can control. You rehearse how to paddle, stand up, adjust your balance. That is the mental preparation, the mental conditioning. You rehearse all this. When a big wave then comes, you rely on what you've practiced. You steady your breathing, again, controlling what you can control. You trust your instincts and you adapt to the water's movements. If you fall in, you then reflect on what went wrong, rest, and try again, becoming stronger and more resilient with each attempt. And you may also, at that point, gain some advice from what we call a mentor, but from a more experienced surfer or paddler. You may gain some advice, some top tips. And with time, surfing those big waves feels less daunting because you're prepared, conditioned, and confident. And now you've got the mental capacity to adapt to any unforeseen eventuality, like a gust of wind or another surfer cutting across you, because you've practiced and you've ingrained the skill, which it is a skill. And like any skill, if you don't practice it, you'll never reach your full potential. But you've ingrained that skill that you're probably only using 60 to 7% of your mental capacity.
Yeah.
So you've got 30 to 40% of free space to be agile when unforeseen circumstances come along. And that's how I like to try and try and get it to understand that way. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a fabulous way. I wasn't expecting to hear the Royal Marines Commando training in the context of surfing big waves, but
in the Southwest,
listening to that explanation, and again, for those of us who only ever worked in corporate world, I suppose some of the things that we do, again, you can only get better through learning from others, preparing. How do you do a big presentation? I was quite fortunate. I had a headmaster who gave me things to do when I was 8 years old, and I was public speaking to 300 people at the age of 8 and 9. So I used to have to write a report about yesterday's football match and present it to the school, things like that. And therefore, whenever I've done public speaking, as an example, I've never had a problem with it, because I started off at primary school, and then it was bigger presentations, then you did kind of debating stuff, and then you do big presentations to colleagues. And it's like, what's the problem? But of course, for some people who've never done it, then it can be very, very difficult. So to hear it challenged like that and explain, I think is absolutely fabulous to hear it in that sense. And I know we might touch on another kind of stress release and your interest in boxing as well, which you seem to have managed to reach a pinnacle there as well. Your time pinnacle. Actually in the Royal Marines, though, Lee. I know you've done leadership and management, and in fact, I remember saying to you when you couldn't attend one of our cohorts once, and you couldn't tell me what you were doing. But when you came back, you said, "Oh, I've had to go to." I think it was Syria. Was it Syria? You were bringing some people back from Syria, and I remember asking you in the next cohort, "So, well, how much notice did you get for that?" And without any kind of looking back, you said, "Oh, I had 12 hours notice to do this and to get myself done over to wherever it was, do the rescue operation, come back, manage all that." And again, in such a matter of fact way. But your leadership and management experience, you're now translating into your consultancy company, Solace International. Can you tell us a bit more about that? What's it going to deliver? Who's your audience? How can we get in contact with you at Solace International?
Yeah, first off, I'll just clarify. It was Sudan, I think.
Sudan.
We were,
Yeah.
I think it was at the beginning of the time of Sudan. But yeah, 12 hours notice in that phase of my career was the norm. But yeah, so where am I going next? Solace International is taking experiences from my time in the Royal Marines through elite sports teams, mentioned the professional football and obviously the boxing that we may touch on later, and now delivering leadership and performance consultancy in a people first, tailored approach to resilient leadership development. And I believe, not only I believe, the significant evidence-based research and experience with this approach, the organisation, whichever organisation across all sectors, will gain higher levels of engagement, trust, loyalty, and then equates to overall performance.
Because these have to be transferable skills. Yeah, they just not just applicable to the military. I'm even in the last 30 minutes, I've taken away so much from what you've said as to how we can implement that in our organisations already.
So absolutely, and more will that be so. I can speak for the Royal Marines in particular, that we engage with all different sectors to see what we can learn, to see what we can offer those sectors. We have regular engagement with academia across the whole country. So again, the perception or a perception could be of the military that it's quite limited. It's quite structured in a way. Of course, it's structured, but it's not very agile. That's one perception, which couldn't be further from the truth. An agile learning, people-centered approach we're seeing real benefits from that.
Yeah.
And there's massive crossover between all business sectors.
Yeah, and that came across when you and I were doing our academic work in Newcastle, because you and I were both surrounded by people from completely different areas. People who worked in higher education, in the NHS, in the probation service, in HMRC, and you could see all of that and the ability to put your training into practice in that academic situation. Lee, you're not quite done in the military. I know that, but you're going to do something else after closing, I think, at the end of March in the Royal Marines. You're doing something with the Dutch MOD, is that right?
Yeah, so I'm going to leave the Royal Marines as a permanent soldier, but I'm going to join as a reservist, and I'm fortunate enough to have been asked to be a leadership development advisor to the Dutch MOD and the Dutch Marine Corps. So I'll do that in a reservist role, part-time, which I'm really excited about. I've been engaging with the Netherlands Marine Corps for a fair few years now. They're about to enroll on a generational change program.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to be involved and to be advising on their leadership development strategy. That is one element, part-time, and then the other element we've already touched on is the consultancy through Solace. So yeah, I'm excited, a little bit nervous, but excited.
I'm sure some of the situations that you will find yourself in Civvy Street will not be something to be nervous about with your background. Just as at one point, like, what are some of the mistakes that we make? What are the most obvious things that we do wrong that you can see with your training that's applicable to all kinds of sectors? What are some things that we do wrong? I suppose, what are some of the things that we can instantly do right to do things a bit better?
It's a great question. And I think there's sort of break that down, I break that into two answers if I may, but the main one, and that's why I'll mention it first, is probably losing sight or communicating the purpose.
Mm.
And that's across military and civilian organisations. And I've seen this done poorly on both sides. I've seen it done really well also, but I've seen it done poorly where the purpose is not explicitly explained or is not communicated to the entire organisation. It's only told to a certain few, and we call that, or I call that in the military, a frozen middle, where there's loads of knowledge and understanding of what their purpose. We call it the intent. What purpose is, but it stays at that level, and the people who are actually delivering at the sub-tactical level or the operational level, it's not really communicated that well. So I think translating that to the civilian sector, I'm a massive fan of Simon Sinek. I think we might have covered him a couple of times.
Yeah,
a couple of times. And obviously, his books start with a why, and whether you call it purpose, intent, why, it's all very much the same. But starting with that and making sure that that's a golden thread run throughout your organisation, and it's explicitly communicated and constantly communicated, then I think every action, every decision, if you have got that, I mean, someone once told me to just stick a post-it note of the why everywhere you go, and every single decision, whether you think it's a micro decision or a main decision, just have a quick check of the why, and does it affect that? Does it align with the why? And I think that could be one tip, if you like, that I see go wrong in across all different sectors, including the military. And then the second one is, and I learned a lot from this during our time at the university, is self-awareness. So, and what I mean by that is, actually being aware of your beliefs, your biases, your strengths, your weaknesses, and being honest, and understanding that as a leader and how that affects your decision making, how that affects your actions. Is, I think a lot of people talk about doing it. I'm not sure if people really, because it's difficult.
It's uncomfortable, isn't it, Lee?
It's uncomfortable.
I absolutely remember we started the first day, as we mentioned, in Newcastle, and I remember thinking, what are the first modules going to be in coaching and mentoring? It's going to be these fantastic techniques. I'm going to delve into coaching. I think we spent pretty much, I thought, the first 6 months on self-awareness, and I remember our tutors saying to us really clearly, saying, just so that you're aware, this is going to be really uncomfortable. We're going to ask you to do some things that you might never have done before. And it was absolutely the case with me. And I agree with you, Lee. I think lots of people almost, pretend's the wrong word, but they do the self-awareness, but actually don't go deep enough into really understanding that. And I think that thread you mentioned about communication sounds so simple, doesn't it, about why you're doing it. And with my background, with a financial background and a C-suite background, I just translated it to a certain extent when we talked about KPIs, for example. And you join an organization, and I constantly now, when I'm coaching and when I'm doing my own exec education, try to do that linkage between the coaching and the objectives of the organization, because if the KPI, or if it doesn't align back with the objectives, then what's the point? Unless there has to be that absolute direct golden thread. Why am I doing this? To do that. So I think some fantastic advice there. Lee, as I'm sure the audience will have detected, a level of drive and determination to get where you are today and to have done everything that you've done. It's pretty hard for us to imagine. I just wanted to close. We've mentioned it a couple of times in boxing, and when I think you mentioned in the past to me personally that you're involved with boxing. Just give us a flavour of that, because it's perhaps a little bit more than just involved in boxing, isn't it? In terms of your role as and your qualification that you've got in that arena as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in boxing. It's probably one of the reasons why I got released from the football way back when I was 19, because I was sort of sneaking off football training and going to the boxing gym, which was, you know, good or bad, whichever way you look at it. But I've always been interested in boxing. When I joined the Marines quite late in life, being a boxer or being a competitive sportsman really helps. You know, team building, being part of it, being part of the group, and personally, you know, really helped. So I started boxing for the Royal Marines. I then, as I got older, I went into a coaching role. I'm now in the operational manager of the Royal Marines Boxing Association. But throughout that journey, I enrolled on the England boxing coaching program. And there's 4 stages, 1 to 4, 4 being the highest. And since 2012, I've been a level 4 advanced coach for England boxing, a coach assessor and coach mentor. So what does that mean? So I now assess the up and coming and new coaches and mentor the coaches through their development journey, which is, again, it's just brilliant for me, because one, I'm giving back. I believe I'm giving back, but two, I see the progression from where boxing and boxing coaching was when I first started to now, and it's unrecognisable. Some real advancements.
And I think I recall you saying there's not many of people at your level about, are there?
No, there isn't. There's only me in the Navy. I'm the only one now. There was one of my colleagues, but he jumped ship a couple of years ago. Not literally, but he left the service. So yeah, I'm the only one in the Royal Navy. I'm not sure how many they are in the UK, but yeah, we're a small group.
Lee, I did want to ask you about that. I'm pretty sure after 40 minutes on this podcast, we have had a whistle-stop tour into what drives Warrant Officer One, Regimental Sergeant Major Lee Drinkwater. Can I just thank you for sharing that with the audience today? I found it absolutely fascinating to hear about not just the title, but what goes into it and what's been the driving force to be able to achieve everything that you've achieved, and talk to us in such a relatable way. And the idea of this podcast is to try and get some kind of insight from people like yourself, Lee, as to what we can do in our own organizations to do better, whether in a coaching capacity, it's about self-awareness, whether it's how to split the difference between stress and pressure and communication in organizations. So I really appreciate it, Lee. Been my privilege to speak with you today, and maybe we get the chance when you're in your next world, and that we may get the chance to kind of do a deep dive sometime on some of the other things that I know we've not touched on today. So thank you once again, Lee. My privilege to have you as my guest.
Hey Jeremy, the thanks is all mine, and keep up the good work with the podcast. I think it's amazing, and hopefully I've added some value to the audience. Thanks, and hopefully catch up soon.
Absolutely. And just for clarity again, your business, your consultancy organization is Solace International. How do we find you? Have you got website, email?
Yeah, there's a website. So there's a website that's solace.int.limited, or LinkedIn is probably the best way. Look for me, Lee Drinkwater, and you'll find all the details for Solace.
We'll find you doing all sorts of things. Again, I know we haven't even touched on some of the endurance events that you do as well. We'll save that for another day, Lee. But thanks
I was
once
going to
again.
I was going to ask you actually if you were coming on the next one.
Right. Well, I think I'm busy that Tuesday. I think that's my day for having my haircut, something like that. I used to do things in the olden days. I have gone nothing like you, but I have done long distance hiking, but at a much more leisurely pace than you would have ever done, Lee. So things like the Cleveland Way, you might know of the Dales Way,
Oh, lovely.
things like that. Yeah, so I've done those a few times. And in fact, my first hike was the Three Peaks in the Yorkshire Dales when I mistakenly agreed on an evening with my friend who said, "Oh, I'm doing this hike in the Yorkshire Dales a week on Saturday. You're up for it, aren't you?" I said, "Well, yeah, fine, yeah." Didn't ask how long it was, where it was, didn't know what I was doing, didn't have any kit, so I borrowed the kit from my brother-in-law at the time, and then turned up. And then first of all he said, "Oh, I've got a mate coming as well," and halfway up Penny Ghent, this mate is firing off up halfway up. We started at 7:30 from the post office in Horton in Ribblesdale, and I said, "This guy up ahead there, he's quite fit, isn't he?" And he said, "Oh yeah, he does triathlons." So there's me, my mate with a dodgy leg, which actually slowed us down on the third peak, but we managed to get there. And this guy who does triathlons in as a hobby. So that was my experience of endurance, Lee. Nothing like what you've experienced, but hope we get a chance to speak again. Thank you once again. Real privilege to have you on. Thank you for sharing it with you.
Thanks, Jeremy. You take care.
Wonderful. And to my next Clarendon Chronicles podcast in a week's time. Before then, bye for now.